Welcome, everyone. My name is Dave DiBenedetto. I'm the editor-in-chief of Garden & Gun magazine. Thank you. I'm also the host of our Wild South podcast, and I am a diehard conservationist. I live and breathe conservation, and I hope that that's seen in the pages of the magazine when you look through it. That said, I don't think you could come to a better place to have this kind of event than Hickory Nut Gap Farm. So cool. I mean, we often talk about Garden & Gun, about people who are doing good while doing well. And to me, that's this place. You know, it's the blueprint for what you can truly do. So it's an honor to be here. And that extends to Asheville. I mean, I don't have to tell you guys. I mean, you live in a community where you understand what it means to be on the front lines of fighting for what's right for the environment. I mean, it's that simple. And I believe that ethos is with so many folks who live here. So for Garden & Gun to be in partnership with Explore Asheville is perfect for this franchise, now in its third year. So I want to bring up Dodie Stevens to say a little bit from Explore Asheville.
Good evening, everyone. For those visiting, welcome to Asheville, but more specifically, welcome to my neighborhood, Fairview. It is, I can't think of anywhere more cozy and breezy and cool to be with the rain coming down. So thank you all for coming out despite the weather. And thank you to Hickory Nut Gap for having us here. Jamie and Amy Ager are here with us tonight. So thank you all for having us. And the farm dog, Prairie, I believe, also joined us. Earlier this evening, I was talking to our collaborators and teammates at Garden & Gun, and one of them shared with me that they used to travel here to the Asheville area and Fairview and take horseback riding camp here at Hickory Nut Gap Farm, and the family, 4 generations later, they are still giving horseback rides and growing pumpkins and teaching families and visitors about sustainability while growing, making a nationally renowned impact in regenerative farming. So thank you all for what you do. Explore Asheville is honored to be partnered here in our second iteration with Garden & Gun. This is part of our values as an organization and as a community in terms of creating these moments to spotlight these important sustainability stories, not just here in the Blue Ridge and across the South, but as global citizens who really care. So with that, we have our cocktails, and I'll just give it to Dave back so we can start this conversation.
Thank you so much. And shout out to Devil's Foot for the NA drinks that are here, and Chemist Spirits, who we also truly love at Garden & Gun. All right, so for those of you who don't know, Champions of Conservation, this is our third year of this franchise in the magazine, and it is my favorite franchise special cover package that we do. It appears in the October-November issue, and we shed light on 10 folks who are doing unbelievable things. I can just tell you as an editor who lives and breathes this stuff, there's nothing more gratifying than being able to use the platform of Garden & Gun to shed light on people who are on the front lines, doing the work that is so important to the place we love. We start the conversations about Champions of Conservation about a year in advance. Editors come to a meeting. We talk about people we've run into, people we've heard about. We put that in a big document. A couple more meetings happen. We reach out to our contributing editors, which is a pretty wide swath of folks. We have an advisory panel who we bring in, JJ Apodaca, who I'll introduce in a minute, was on that panel this year, former champion. So, I mean, we're looking at 80, 60 to 80 people, and they're all good. They all do good work. But we get down to 10, and it's really about those folks who just are, making a difference, have an unbelievable passion, and we think, hopefully, that a little bit of Garden and Gun spotlight on them will help them do even better work. So that is what we are at Champions of Conservation. All right, joining me tonight to ask the hard questions, JJ Apodaca. He's the executive director of the Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy here in Asheville. As I mentioned, a former champion himself, and he was on this year's advisory panel. He is a geneticist and herpetologist who conserves some of the most endangered reptiles and amphibians across the South, like bog turtles and hellbenders. We got a couple of folks who love bog turtles. He's also become a friend of the magazine, as you can tell, and we're delighted to have him here. So I'm going to introduce the panel, and then JJ and I will ask some questions, and hopefully you can hear from these folks who are doing the good work. And since we're not in any order, I'm going to start with Kyle Liebarger. Raise your hand. There we go. So after Kyle Liebarger, after working as a forester for the state of Alabama, Kyle founded the nonprofit called the Native Habitat Project, and now, as its director, restores native ecosystems through consultations, prescribed burning services, and he also does a lot of knocking on people's door to tell them what's growing in their backyard. I learned about Kyle through Instagram. I hate to say that. I feel like I'm 12, but I can't wait to talk to him more. All right, Kelly Holbrooks. Kelly, who you may know, is the executive director of the Southern Highlands Reserve, a botanical garden and research center on top of Toxaway Mountain that is at the forefront of restoring high-elevation spruce fir forests. She is the co-founder of the Southern Appalachian Spruce Restoration Initiative. And for me, Kelly represents someone who saw a problem and said, why am I standing here? I'm going to fix it. And we'll get into that soon. Tony Friedrich. All right. Tony lives on Maryland's Eastern Shore. He's the president and policy director of the American Saltwater Guides Association, a nonprofit focused on fisheries conservation. And currently, you have a lot of fish in your targets, some of them bait fish. Currently, redfish, striped bass, and false albacore are some of those focus species. Jimmy Bullock. There he is. Jimmy oversees sustainable forestry, environmental policy at RMS, which is Resource Management Service, one of the world's largest providers of timberland investment services. He's all about collaborative conservation, which is what this is all about. It's about awareness. He figures out how conservation can happen on private lands and how working lands can stay working while providing the habitat threatened species need. And finally, the man in the fish shirt, Bernie Kahida. Bernie is an aquatic conservation biologist at the Tennessee Aquarium, where he works with native tiny and rare fish species that most people don't realize exist. He's also one of the world's experts on sturgeon. How many T-shirts do you own, you think? Over 50. Okay. And then another 70 or 80 T-shirts. Okay. He wore his dress shirt, his dress fish shirt tonight. Anyway, all right, I'm going to sit down, and we're going to start talking. Thank you. All right, Kyle, I'm going to start with you. As I mentioned, I first became aware of what you do because of the Instagram algorithm. And, don't tell Mark Zuckerberg, because I like to hate on all that stuff. But you have used social media in a way that I think all of us can aspire to. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about what you do.
I was a forester working on private lands and logging timber, and I was looking at these places and trying to do this as sustainably as possible. And what was coming back up afterwards was a lot of grassland species, and so I started paying attention to those and realizing, hey, I didn't learn about this in school, and so that just fueled my passion for it. And so while out on these different properties across Alabama and Tennessee, I was spending more time looking at plants than I was being a forester. So making no money and managing some of these populations for free for these landowners because nobody else is going to manage these rare places.
So talk about grasslands for a second. Like Alabama, I mean, I don't think most of us would typically go to that idea of like grasslands in Alabama, but that was and is and should be a part of that geography, right?
Yeah, down on the coast you have the longleaf ecosystems, which are grasslands, and then you have the Black Belt ecosystem, which is grassland, and then you have the Cumberland Plateau and the Piedmont, which had savannas and grasslands, and then North Alabama had huge prairies there along the Tennessee River as well. We had prairie chickens there at one point.
Prairie chickens. So when you're, let's go back to social media. You seem really comfortable in front of the camera. I mean, I started following you a couple of years ago, and I'm like, I'll follow you through. I'll take a brick wall. Like, I get fired up, and I'm not even in Alabama, but it's that same idea. When did you know that would work for you?
It wasn't always that way. At one point, I looked miserable in front of a camera. So I started making posts about these plants that I was seeing on Facebook, just uploading photos, and people really liked that. So I started making videos about it, and those pretty much immediately took off after I got a little better at it. So.
Yeah, and just if you don't follow Kyle, I mean, he will go into these areas where typical areas that you may have seen in your as you are outdoors, and then he will start to spot the wildlife, the wild plants, the native plants that are there, and he'll tell you about them. And he'll tell you about them in a way that you really care. And it's not only it is way more than identifying. I mean, currently you're kind of in a battle with a development there. Battle may be too strong, but it's not because they're developing on an area that has federally protected plants, right?
Yeah, and they say this. They said this is the first time they've ever had anybody stand up against them for plants. So that tells you how much they've gotten away with in the past. So, I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy confrontation, but somebody has to speak up for those places. Thank you.
So, how many followers do you have? I know that's such a I feel like my son saying that. How many followers do you have?
Yeah, I checked on it 5 minutes ago. So every 5 minutes I try to check on it. So I don't know. It's
it's
probably
a lot.
over 1 million
it's
over
lot.
all the platforms.
Don't let him fool you. I mean, it's cool stuff. So, all right. Anyway, we'll be back for more. But over to you, JJ.
Is that on? There we go.
You're on, yep.
All right. I'm going to try to keep up because it's clear Dave's been practicing on this podcast stuff, and now he's like expert interviewer here. But I get to start with Kelly, who I'm excited. So I came onto the spruce scene, 10-ish years ago, and I was really excited to meet Kelly. And at that time, she was already like a superhero, and so I was excited to learn a little bit about your origin story. So can you tell us about seeing the side of Reynolds Mountain clear cut and what that did for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a landscaper in Asheville, North Carolina. Yep. And I thought I was going to be an environmental lawyer, but I said, no, that's maybe not the right route for me. So I started landscaping, and I was working at a residential landscape. And I looked over at Reynolds Mountain, and they were just clear cutting it and just ripping the soil away, and it made me mad. And for any of you guys that know me, I'm a pretty jovial kind of girl, and so I took that fire in my belly, and instead of just being mad for the rest of my life, I decided to get involved. And so I went back and got my degree in landscape architecture at University of Georgia and decided to be a part of the good fight.
Go dog.
I guess I'm obligated to start with Roll Tide.
Saturday.
You'll be hearing from me, Dave. So like I said, our introduction was spruce, which is one of my favorite habitat types in western North Carolina. It's amazing, and most people don't realize it. So it's this incredible ecosystem with an owl that's the size of a robin and even a tarantula, and flying squirrels, just really, really amazing things in our backyard. So can you tell us more about the spruce ecosystem and why you're fighting to save it?
Absolutely. So number one thing is it's the second most endangered ecosystem in the United States. Pretty big deal. Clearly, it's a keystone species, which means that if that keystone brick falls out of the ecosystem, then the whole ecosystem fails. Provides clean air, clean water. There's a couple of cute critters involved, which is the Carolina northern flying squirrel, federally listed, and the elusive spruce fir moss spider, which is the world's smallest tarantula. It's an eighth of an inch. Never seen one of those guys. And then about 16 plant species that the Forest Service has identified. But from a human perspective, when you walk into a spruce fir forest, it is utterly magical. The soil has a spongy step to it. The air is crisp and full of a balsam smell. If you haven't done it, put it on your bucket list.
Like, where could we go?
Oh, I can take you, or you can take yourself.
Yeah.
You can go up to Black Balsam.
Yeah.
You could go to Grandfather Mountain,
Okay. Yeah.
Roan Mountain,
Yeah.
Smokies,
All right.
Grayson
okay.
Highlands.
Yep. I'm ready. All right, hold on. So there's an owl the size of a sparrow?
Yeah, the saw-whet owl, so
That's-
cute.
yeah.
That one is state listed as endangered, but
Got
not
it.
federally yet.
Okay, got it.
And Kelly meant to say that the cutest of all is the pygmy salamander, but she just
I did.
forgot about
I'm so sorry, I forgot.
I am surrounded by folks that love salamanders. I'm looking at you, Lindsay Lyles. Good. All right, so Tony Friedrich, welcome. I am I'm just an obsessed saltwater fisherman, so I love what you're doing. I'm a conservationist and a fisherman, and I think those two go hand in hand. You can talk to that, but here's something that shocked me when I was learning about Tony. His group lobbied one of the things, lobbied successfully to tighten the redfish limits in Louisiana. So if you haven't been to Louisiana, they like to keep everything they catch. And they have a lot of fish. They really do have a lot of fish. But it is not of the mindset to ever stop. I mean, it's a fill the cooler mindset. And I'm just curious, like, how did that go?
So one of my favorite things to say is we fight like the third monkey on the ramp to Noah's Ark. Kind of appropriate tonight. That's our mentality. So in particular I'll talk about redfish. I'll tell you about the association a little bit. So, it started 5 years ago. And, even though it started 5 years ago, the core part of the team probably started 20 years ago. We have a couple of 100 years experience on our team. Fishery science is really hard. They're hard to count, especially in salt water. It's hard to count how many are caught. It's hard to count how many are out there. And there's actually federal court precedent that when we have an overfished stock and there's a fisheries management plan put in place, it only has to have a 50% chance of success. That's the federal precedent. So we could fight like the third monkey on the ramp to Noah's Ark for a 50% chance. So you got to be, if you got to be dumb, you got to be tough, right? That's what we do every day. So redfish in Louisiana have not had the regulation change since 1988.
Wow.
like Paul Prudhomme.
Right.
Redfish grow once they hit 28 inches about the same rate as a white oak. So there was a redfish that was recaptured in Tampa Bay a couple of years ago, and the tag was so old it was pre-computers, and the biologist had retired, but he had kept all the paper records, and from 28 to 34 inches, it had been 27 years.
Wow. Yeah.
So you're talking about it's really difficult to replace these. So Louisiana had obscene redfish regulations. It was 5 fish. You could catch, they were all slot fish. You could catch 1 giant fish a day. So you have a guide. You have 6 people on his boat. They could keep a guide limit. So they're killing 7 giant redfish a day plus another. And they just take these dock shots. And people really don't eat that much. It's just advertising for the next trip. So somebody will flip through Instagram and go, oh, this guy, I catch a lot of fish with him. Salt life. Right. Hey, pull that sticker off your truck if you got it. Because that's what we look like. And we're like, yeah, taking him fishing. Like, nope. They pull up. We're like, damn, motor just broke, man. I'm sorry. So they didn't want to change anything. I could get real deep into the science.
Yeah, all right.
I won't do it.
Yeah, no. It shows you what you were up against and what you did. But one last question.
Yeah.
All right. Menhaden, right? The most important fish in the sea that nobody knows about.
Let me take a drink before I get into this.
Yeah, all right. Menhaden are like Popeye's spinach to every fish that exists. They're bait fish. There's no human consumption. They do not or would not taste very well. But dog food, cat food, they use the scales to make jewelry. There's a huge fishery in the Chesapeake Bay. It's not raining at all, is it? There's a huge fishery in the Chesapeake Bay, and what fisheries conservation had to catch up to was this idea that, okay, we can protect the game fish. We can say, stop, you can't keep them over this size or release them at this size. But if there was no food for them to eat, that was the part we were missing, right? We were doing all this work, but the fish were starving because all the bait fish were being sucked out of the Chesapeake Bay. And Tony and his group, this is a big, big, big money industry. You guys went after it. Yeah.
Even predating the Guides Association, we've been fighting against these companies since 2012. It's a reduction fishery. So there's a fishery in the Chesapeake Bay. There's a fishery in the Gulf of Mexico. In the Chesapeake Bay, they take about 500 million menhaden a year. In the Gulf of Mexico, there's no limit. We really don't even know. It's probably about 1 billion fish. Menhaden convert the sun's energy to protein. They convert the sun's energy to protein. They feed on plankton. They're an incredibly oily fish, incredibly nutritious for a striped bass. 1 adult menhaden equals like 1,000 bay anchovies. So it's thought, BTT, Bonefish Tarpon Trust, is doing some research. If tarpon don't get enough menhaden, they have complete spawning failure. Their spawning strategy, the eggs have to float. This reduction fishery uses several 1,000-foot purse seines. That 2 boats, net goes out, lock them up. They bring it into the mothership. They vacuum the fish. They melt the fish down for oil. Do not take omega-3 heart pills. They're made with menhaden. Virginia, they're allowed for human consumption. The Gulf of Mexico, they're not. Primarily, the Gulf of Mexico is pelletized. It's chicken and pig feed for basically most of it goes to China. These companies donate maximum amounts to every governor and every legislator in every state that they operate, and they have done so for decades. And this is probably the biggest David and Goliath fight, because if these fish filter the water, they turn plankton into protein, and everything in the world eats them, and you cannot take 1.5 billion fish a year and say that it doesn't matter when it is the keystone of the environment. So,
amen. Go ahead.
Make me follow that. That's powerful stuff. So I get to ask my good friend Jimmy Bullock here some questions, and I wanted to give a little background before I did that. Because Jimmy and I have a deal. I get to bring him to conservation meetings and convince everybody that he's a timber guy and not a bad guy. And he gets to take me to timber meetings and convince everybody that I'm not just a dirty hippie fighting for salamanders. So
I have the better end of that deal.
So for those of you that aren't really engaged in the conservation world, I think one of the most important fights we have in the Southeast is private land conservation. And one of the most exciting things for me is this inclusion of private lands into major conservation efforts. It's really only started in the last 10 or 15 years. A lot thanks to Mr. Bullock here. So a lot of people think you're the bad guy. JJ circa 2006 included, before I ran into the buzzsaw that was Jimmy Bullock at a meeting, for working for the timber company, right? But instead, you're at the forefront of leading conservation efforts, and it's hard to explain how much of an impact Jimmy has at the national level, the highest levels of Fish and Wildlife Service, the highest levels of a lot of agencies respect this man's voice in conservation a lot more than most. And so I kind of know some of your secrets, but I want you to share those secrets. How have you brought people together and collaborated and gotten private land conservation? He's too modest. He's going to say it's other people, but...
Well, you just answered the question. It's other folks. You know, you're right, JJ. I'm looking at the group up here in the audience, and, you know, forestry and cutting trees often perceived as, you know, a necessary evil at best and a lot worse at worst. The truth is, in the South, most of the forests are privately owned, and the most important thing is to keep those forests as forests, because I have family lands that go back to the early 1800s. Many of you do, but I also work for a very large land manager. And keeping those lands in forest is the most important thing. And so some of us have to make a profit to do that. Some own them for other reasons. But getting to your secret sauce question, if you would, it's really about going out. Sorry, Kyle, I'm not on Instagram. I'm too set in my ways. But it's going out and meeting folks where they are and understanding what their concerns are, and trying to figure out, okay, how do we find common ground here? And with forest management, it's very easy to say this is bad, because timber harvest doesn't look pretty. No way around it. But when you stop and think about how diverse these forests really are, and thanks to folks like JJ, who's doing really good research, we know that managed southern forests are amongst the most diverse in the U.S., probably the world. But when we understand, okay, take the red hill salamander, just happens to be JJ's favorite salamander. Sorry, David, I got to throw his favorite salamander in here. But it's on the brink of being recovered. At one time, it was on the brink of disappearing from the world. For those of you that don't know, it's found in a handful of counties, 2 soil formations in Alabama.
So, like, how long ago was it on the brink? Like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago?
JJ would say 20 years, I would think.
20, really, like probably in the 80s,
30.
90s.
Okay, got it.
It was
Yeah,
rough
I mean,
shape.
very,
It was in very bad.
very recent.
Yeah.
Very recent.
Yeah.
And I would argue that forest landowners stepped up and said, we've got an obligation to make sure this species stays as part of this system. And whether it's through habitat conservation plans, whether it's through agreements with the state or the Fish and Wildlife Service, whether it's through donations or conservation sales to the state of Alabama, I would argue that private landowners who owned at one time all of the remaining habitat have made sure that critter's still there. Folks like JJ
That goes to the salamander.
yeah, that came to us and said, hey, we need some help here, and here's why you need to get on this bandwagon. And it was an easy bandwagon to get onto once we understood it. And likewise, when JJ saw we're willing to be on that bandwagon with him, then suddenly we're working together for the same outcomes.
So for those of you that don't know, depending on what estimate you look at, 90 to 95% of the Southeast is privately owned. And so that's why this is important. So as I said, Jimmy is one of the leading voices in getting private lands engaged in conservation. So what makes you excited about the future of private land conservation in the Southeast?
I've got a lady working for me who, right at this moment, is speaking at Climate Week in New York. People like her make me excited about the future of conservation in the Southeast. You know, she is 27 years old and speaking at Climate Week. And I'm sure she's crushing it. But what excites me is we figured out a new way of doing business on conservation across the South's forest, and it's something called the Wildlife Conservation Initiative. And it's the idea that working lands can work, and we can conserve species. And we can build partnerships, whether it's with the state, Fish and Wildlife Service, folks like JJ, academia, and we can find solutions that have never happened before. And I'll give you two examples. Last year, our company, and I'm very proud of this, signed the first agreement to reintroduce the reticulated flatwood salamander to private land. And we did it through an agreement that 3 years ago didn't exist. We made a new tool to do that, and now any private landowner can use that tool to reintroduce any species on their land. And we're very close to a new tool, again, a partners agreement for Fish and Wildlife Service, never been used like this, to conserve 3 bat species on working forest on 20 million acres plus of private working forest in the South. And that's what gets me excited. When we can come up with solutions that a year ago, wasn't even an idea. And it's about to be signed. That's what gets me excited. It's folks like JJ, it's folks like Kirsty White, it's people that have the passion. Lindsay, you know, who happens to kind of like salamanders just a little bit. But it's folks that have the passion that get me excited.
Lindsay's angling for a salamander cover on Garden and Gun, but she's got a ways to go for that. Anyway, hey, there was a big salamander picture in the package. Yeah. All right. So what was the number of acres in private land, or percentage? 95? Is that what you guys said?
Depending on what estimate you look at, it's above 90%. It's 90 to 95% of
Amazing.
The Southeast.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So we're never going to be able to solve the conservation issues in the Southeast without engaging private lands, or we're just going to have small pockets of things left over.
Right. All right. Bernie Kahida. So when I saw Bernie, what I knew about Bernie is he goes in. I mean, he does a lot of things. One of the things is he goes into caves and discovers new shrimp species. And when I saw that he was 6'2", I'm like, how do you get into caves? Yeah.
You stoop really low.
He told me that he could just straddle the water, like that in a cave. But all right, there is a story that. Were you stuck in a cave when you discovered that species of shrimp?
On the way in, it's called Elbow Cave, and it's not made for someone 6'4".
Okay, I cut him down by 2 inches.
So it was a small passage going in. You had to make a 90-degree turn to the right, and I was too long, and I kind of got stuck. I couldn't go forward. I couldn't go backward. But we had people on either side of me because we thought this might be a problem. And the guy behind me was going to take off my boots. Hopefully I could get around. And him just moving my feet, I was able to get through. And that's where we discovered the undescribed Tuscumbia cave shrimp, a little freshwater shrimp about that big. There's only 2 other species of cave shrimp in all of the United States, one around Huntsville, Alabama, and the other up in Mammoth Cave. So this was a pretty cool thing to find.
All right, so when you saw that, were you immediately like, that's different? Did you see it, or did it look like the other 2 cave shrimp?
So I said, that's not a pill bug. That's not a little side swimming scud. That's got to be a shrimp. I'm 80 miles away from Alabama cave fish. It's got to be a new species. That was my thought in about 2 seconds.
Ah, nice. Okay. So I have heard you say that you're happiest in the southeastern United States.
Yes,
Why?
because it is an underwater rainforest. We have the greatest diversity of aquatic animals anywhere in the world in a temperate climate. Tennessee has 335 species of fishes.
And you know the name of every one.
Yes, I do. And getting back to the private lands, the few public lands we have, they're almost all up in the mountains and on ridges. And almost all of our aquatic diversity is down in the valleys. So it's really hard if you're not working with private landowners to do any conservation. But we just opened a new gallery in the Tennessee Aquarium. It's called Ridges to Rivers, because those public lands on the ridges are so important, because everything that happens in a watershed ends up in your river. So if you've got good water quality through good grasslands, good red spruce forests, you help improve the water quality down in the valley. And all of us need fresh water, even humans. So if we save these little critters, we're saving ourselves.
What are you, I mean, you're touching on this a little bit. What is your biggest challenge? What is the biggest challenge to saving the little guys? Is it awareness? What is it?
So first of all, rivers are not like marine or terrestrial environments. They're linear and they flow. And so if you have a refuge on a river, everything that happens upstream affects your refuge, and even everything that happens downstream. If you channelize, you'll get the bottom of the creek eroding down to bedrock if you channelize downstream. So it's almost impossible to protect a river unless you protect the entire watershed. So you've got to work with public landowners, land trusts, just all partnerships you can imagine to get any conservation done.
All right, so I was talking with Bernie earlier, and you mentioned that you kind of know, you and your wife talk about fish by the expressions that they have.
On their face. So the bullhead minnow, just like its name, it's very grumpy. The laurel dace, it's a happy fish even though it's endangered. It smiles. The telescope shiner, it's got a surprised look on its face. So really, a lot of these minnows, they're silvery, they've got a stripe, and it's just some nuance that tells them apart. And I really use the expression of the on their face to tell them apart. It works.
And so most of these fish you're fighting for are the length of our index finger.
This is a lunker of most of the guys I study, from Alabama cavefish to Cahaba shiners to rush darters, and I'm even studying little pygmy sturgeon that don't get any this big over in Central Asia. So I like the little guys.
All right, last question. Sorry, I told you I was a fish nerd. Sturgeon. I mean, we're knocking down dams, right? I mean, we're making some progress.
We are. We just found this out about 20 years ago. The biggest problem with sturgeon, they can swim up to the base of those dams. They can spawn. Their eggs hatch. The little larvae, they swim up and eat plankton. But those larvae, so you guys familiar with vultures, right? On a summer day, they'll be up there. They maybe flap their wings once an hour. They ride those air currents. These little larval sturgeon, they have to ride those water currents. But if there's another reservoir downstream and they hit that still water, they use all their energy to stay in the water column and they die. Or if that dam's too close to salt water, they're riding the currents, eating zooplankton, they're happy, they hit that salt water and they're dead. So it's that larval drift of the sturgeon, which happens to all 26 species worldwide, is the issue with dams. That's what it really affects.
If you were to have any advice for upcoming conservation professionals, what would it be?
Yeah, JJ, take that. Conservation advice for conservation professional. That was the, yeah.
I'm not a panelist here, man. This
Yeah,
is.
I'm putting you on the spot.
I think it's like, you know, what you see here is like the best advice I can give is to find your passion and follow it all the way down, because it's going to be hard and there's going to be a big fight, and you've got to have that passion to keep you driving forward, whether that's spruce trees or private land conservation or salamanders if you're lucky enough. But I think that's it, you know, just like, and also I think a lot of people get trapped in going towards a certain style of learning, and really you've got to be focused on the problem, because, you know, if you're a disease biologist, everything is a disease threat, and that's not the threat to everything. It might be a threat for some things, but it's not the threat for anything. So that'd be my advice, but I would love to hear from Bernie.
Hold on. Go ahead.
Nobody's going to blow a trumpet for you. You're not going to spike the football in the end zone. You have to know in your heart when you want a big one, even if other people don't understand. And if you're passionate about it, you get up every day and if you win 2 a year, it's a great year. You know, and everything you're just chewing up ground and you're getting another victory. And like seeing young people like yourself, it inspires like all of us. Because a big question in our heart, a huge question in our heart is who's going to take our place when we're not around. So we desperately want people that are passionate about it and to show them what we know so you can take it and put it in your work. So.
You go ahead, Julie, former champion of conservation.
I'm glad you asked that question. Part of passion is extremely important, but you also have to know what you're talking about. You have to really know the subject matter. I dealt with Jimmy Bullock and men like him for years in fighting forestry. I did better after I took some forestry courses. You really have to know your subject matter, then you can be passionate.
Great ad. Any other, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, thanks.
I'm just curious from any of the panelists, what one thing would make the most dramatic change or effect in supporting the earth?
Starting with Jimmy at the end. Go ahead. What would be the most dramatic change that would help what you're doing?
You know, that's not even a softball question, so I got to think for a second. But I would say the most dramatic change is for folks to believe that working lands can work and conserve. They're not mutually exclusive. And whether it's forest, whether it's farms, whether it's, you know, just land folks own because it's been in their family for generations. You can do multiple things, but you can do great conservation.
Yeah, that's great. Kyle, go ahead. Or Kyle, yeah.
I'd say if everybody was able to just slow down and look around their area and see what their area has to offer. My colleague Jake, he's from the Piedmont of Alabama. When he started working with me in North Alabama, he was like, we just don't have these prairie remnants and these cool places in the Piedmont. And then as he was going back down there to see his parents on holidays, he was finding way better prairie remnants than I was finding in North Alabama. And it's just, you grow up there your whole life and you don't pay attention to this stuff. And then suddenly that, a switch flips and you start to see it. So if people were able to do that, I think that would make the biggest difference.
Yeah, I mean, we said it earlier. It's about awareness, right? Like, if we can get people to understand what's there and care, right, then there will be some emotional investment. But Bernie, go ahead. What's your answer?
So the Southeast has a third of the threatened and endangered fishes. We get 0.9% of the state and federal funding in the Southeast. Another way of looking at it, for every dollar spent in the Southeast, $47 is spent outside of the Southeast. So a huge impact would be pressuring our politicians to go to Washington and fight for conservation dollars. I mean, the South is all about its cultural heritage. We need to fight for our natural heritage.
All right, Kelly.
I echo everything you guys have said 100%. The two things I'll leave with you are connection to nature. We're not a different species. We're not outside of this natural world. We are within this natural world. So just connect to yourself, whether that's being in nature by yourself or enjoying an enjoyable rainstorm during a panel discussion. And as far as spruce work goes, we have to play a role in it. There was unsustainable logging over a century ago, and this species, this keystone species, second most endangered species in the United States, cannot rebound on its own. So, and that's not the only one. There are species across the entire Southeast and the world, but the Southeast, especially Western North Carolina, is the most biologically diverse compared to the Amazon. Humans have got to be involved.
So our tagline, to answer your question, and I agree with every single word that was uttered, our tagline is better business through conservation. Look at the farm that you're on.
Yeah, right.
Look where you are. There are, for us, you don't have to gauge the success of your day with not being able to shut the cooler, because there's so many fish in it, and you'll put them in your freezer and throw them away in 6 months. Make the conscious decision to say, I'm going to eat this tonight. Better business through conservation. If there's more fish in the water, we take more fish. We take more trips. If the resource is healthier, all the people I represent make more money. Better business. They're staying in more hotels. They're buying more sandwiches. They're buying more fuel. And it just drives the economy. And I think for every single thing that every person up here does, that's a great message. Is like, conservation does not necessarily mean that a developer's losing money. Or there are ways to thread that needle where everyone wins, and you can still make a profit by taking people fishing or by doing forestry. But you care about the resource and you do it in the proper way. And in the process, as we take people fishing, we make you fall in love with the ocean. Not just looking at it in a magazine or in a YouTube video, but being on our boat and seeing it. And if I can make you love it, you will protect it.
Amen. Amen. Look, I could stay up here all night. I said it earlier. This program is one of the most exciting things we get to do at the magazine, and I feel so grateful to be able to know these folks, to be able to share their stories with you, with the readers, because it can get depressing looking out at the environment and what's going on and all the battles, but these folks on the front lines are making a difference, and it came up a lot tonight about being aware, about caring. We might not be able to ourselves save a prairie, but we can plant a pollinator pocket in our backyard and put some milkweed in, and the monarchs come. It's not insurmountable. Everything we do can make a difference, and I try to teach that to my kids, and if they were awake right now, I'd call them and tell them everything I heard tonight, because I think these folks are great. So I appreciate everybody coming out. It's a rainy night, but conservation doesn't stop in the rain. So love it. Thank you, and drive safe.